The dust storm chased Elena Wilson down the barren road like a hungry predator as she stumbled forward, her thin cotton dress offering little protection against the whipping sand. Her cheeks, once round and flushed with youth, now hollow with grief and hunger, bore streaks of tears that cut through the dirt on her face. She'd been walking for 3 days since her family had traded her like cattle to pay their debts, the betrayal still a fresh wound in her heart. Elena had known something was wrong when her father avoided her eyes at the breakfast table that morning in April of 1875. Her mother had been unusually attentive, fixing Elena's hair and insisting she wear her good dress despite it being just another ordinary Tuesday in their small farming community outside Santa Fe. By sunset, she discovered the terrible truth: her inability to conceive a child after 2 years of marriage to the now deceased James Porter had made her damaged goods in her family's eyes. When drought threatened their farm and creditors came knocking, they found a solution in a cattle baron from the south who needed a housekeeper and didn't ask questions. "You'll learn to be happy there," her father had said, not meeting her eyes as he handed her a small bundle of possessions. "Some women aren't meant for motherhood, Ellie. This way you can still be useful." The memory burned hotter than the New Mexico sun beating down on her head. She'd escaped in the dead of night, taking nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's silver locket. She had no destination in mind, only the desperate need to get away, to find something better than being traded away like a defective piece of merchandise. As the sun began to set on the horizon, Elena spotted the silhouette of buildings in the distance. Pinos Altos. She'd heard tales of the mining town, rough but prosperous, filled with fortune seekers and those running from their past. Perhaps there she could disappear, forge a new life where no one knew her shame. The wind picked up as she approached the outskirts of town, her steps faltering with exhaustion. The world tilted dangerously, the edges of her vision blurring. Elena reached out to steady herself against a fence post, but her hand met only air as her knees buckled beneath her. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. Through the haze of exhaustion, she glimpsed a weathered face beneath the brim of a dusty hat, concerned blue eyes examining her with startling intensity. "Easy there, miss," came a deep voice, steady and calm amid her panic. "I've got you." Elena tried to respond, to thank this stranger for his kindness, but the words wouldn't come. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the stranger lifting her into his arms with surprising gentleness for such a rugged-looking man. When Elena opened her eyes again, she found herself in an unfamiliar room. Rough-hewn wooden walls surrounded her, and she lay atop a simple but clean bed. A patchwork quilt covered her, and her shoes had been removed and placed neatly beside the door. "You're awake," came that same deep voice from before. Elena startled, her gaze darting to a corner of the room where a man sat in a rocking chair, a book open in his hands. He was tall, she could tell even as he sat, with broad shoulders that strained against his simple cotton shirt. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. Dark hair, too long to be fashionable, curled slightly at his collar. "Who are you?" Elena managed, her voice raspy with thirst. "Where am I?" The man stood, setting his book aside, and poured water from a pitcher into a cup. "Name's Henry Turner," he said, approaching and offering her the water. "You're at my ranch about 2 miles outside of Pinos Altos. Found you collapsing on the road when I was heading back from town." Elena took the cup with trembling hands, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was. Alone in a stranger's home, miles from anywhere, with no one who knew where she was. Yet something in the man's steady gaze reassured her. He made no move to come closer, maintaining a respectful distance. "Thank you," she said after taking a long drink. "I'm Elena Wilson." "You've been out for nearly a day," Henry said, his tone matter of fact but not unkind. "Doc Jenkins stopped by, said you were suffering from exhaustion and dehydration, but nothing that food and rest won't fix." Elena clutched the cup tighter. "I can't pay for a doctor." A hint of a smile crossed Henry's face. "Doc owes me a favor. Helped him wrangle a particularly ornery mare last spring." He studied her for a moment. "If you don't mind my asking, Miss Wilson, what were you doing out there alone?" "These roads aren't safe for a woman traveling by herself." Elena lowered her gaze. "I was leaving a bad situation." Something in her tone must have conveyed the gravity of her circumstances, because Henry simply nodded. "Well, you're welcome to stay here until you're back on your feet. My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, has been looking after you. She'll bring some food up shortly." "I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition," he interrupted gently. "Ranch this size, one more mouth to feed won't make a difference." Before Elena could respond, the door opened, and an older woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun entered, carrying a tray. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were sharp and assessing as they took in Elena's conscious state. "Ah, you're awake, child," she said, her voice carrying a slight Irish lilt. "Good. I've brought you some stew and cornbread. You need to put some meat back on those bones." "Mrs. Abernathy," Henry said, "this is Miss Elena Wilson." The older woman set the tray on a small table beside the bed. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Wilson, though I wish it were under better circumstances." "Thank you for your kindness," Elena replied, the simple courtesy feeling foreign after days of desperate flight. "I'll leave you to your meal," Henry said, moving toward the door. "Mrs. Abernathy can help you with anything you need. We can talk more when you're feeling stronger." After he left, Mrs. Abernathy helped Elena sit up against the pillows and place the tray on her lap. The stew was rich and hearty, with chunks of beef, potatoes, and carrots swimming in a savory broth. Elena hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful touched her lips. "Mr. Turner seems like a good man," Elena ventured between bites. Mrs. Abernathy's face softened. "That he is. Been working for him 5 years now, since my Albert passed. Never raised his voice, never complained when I needed time to visit my daughter when she had her babies." She straightened the quilt across Elena's legs. "He's respected in these parts. Built this ranch from nothing after the war." "He fought in the war?" Elena asked, curious despite herself. "Cavalry. Doesn't talk about it much." Mrs. Abernathy's expression grew somber. "Lost his wife and infant son to fever while he was away fighting. Came west afterward, like many did, looking for a fresh start." Elena's heart constricted at the thought of such loss. To have a child, only to lose it and a wife as well. No wonder there was a shadow behind the rancher's eyes, a gravity to his demeanor that spoke of old sorrows. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said quietly. "Life's been hard on that man, but he's never let it embitter him," Mrs. Abernathy replied. "Now enough talk. You need to eat and rest." For the next 3 days, Elena did little but sleep and eat. Her body, pushed beyond its limits during her desperate flight, demanded recovery time. Mrs. Abernathy proved a kind if brisk caretaker, bringing meals, fresh clothing borrowed from her own daughter's wardrobe, and occasional news from the ranch. Henry kept his distance, only checking in briefly each evening to inquire after her health. Elena found herself oddly looking forward to these short visits, appreciating his quiet manner and the respect with which he treated her, never pushing for details she wasn't ready to share, never making her feel indebted for his assistance. On the 4th morning, Elena woke feeling truly rested for the first time. Sunlight streamed through the small window, casting golden patterns across the wooden floor. She rose, dressed in the simple cotton dress Mrs. Abernathy had provided, and made her way downstairs. The main room of the ranch house was spacious but sparsely furnished a large table with 6 chairs, a settee before the fireplace, and bookshelves lining one wall. What caught Eleanor's eye, however, was the piano tucked into a corner, its dark wood gleaming in the morning light. Unable to resist, Eleanor approached it, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. Music had been her solace growing up, the one thing her mother had insisted she learn despite her father's protests about the expense. "You play." She turned to find Henry standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the bright light outside. He wore work clothes, a simple shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing muscled forearms, and denim trousers tucked into worn boots. A leather vest completed his attire. "I used to," Eleanor admitted. "My mother taught me." Henry stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "It was my wife's. Catherine loved music." A shadow crossed his face briefly. "No one's played it in years." Eleanor withdrew her hand. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry into painful memories." "No need for apologies," he said, his expression clearing. "It's good to see you up and about. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you." Eleanor straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Turner, you've been exceedingly kind, but I've imposed on your hospitality long enough. I should be on my way." "And where exactly would you go?" he asked, not unkindly. The question hung between them, highlighting the reality of her situation. Eleanor had no money, no family that wanted her, no destination in mind. "I'll find work in town," she said with more confidence than she felt. "I can sew and I'm educated. Perhaps I could assist in the school or—" "Miss Wilson," Henry interrupted gently, "Pinos Altos is a mining town. Rough men with rough ways, no place for a woman alone without protection." He gestured to a chair at the table. "Please sit. I have a proposition for you." Warily, Eleanor took a seat. Henry remained standing, seemingly more comfortable on his feet. "Mrs. Abernathy is getting on in years," he began. "She's mentioned wanting to spend more time with her daughter's family in Santa Fe. I've been meaning to hire an assistant for her, someone to help with the household duties, the correspondence for the ranch, perhaps even teach some of the hands children who are too far from town to attend school regularly." Eleanor blinked, surprised by the offer. "You would hire me?" "You know nothing about me. I know you're educated by your speech and manners. I know you're determined by the fact you walked for days rather than remain in whatever situation you were fleeing." His blue eyes held her steadily. "And I know what it is to need a fresh start." Eleanor felt a warmth spreading through her chest at his words. For the first time since she'd fled her family's farm, she felt a glimmer of hope. "The position includes room and board, plus a small salary," Henry continued. "You'd have your own quarters in the house, separate from mine, of course. Mrs. Abernathy would remain as chaperone, so your reputation would be protected." It was more consideration than her own father had shown, selling her off without concern for her welfare or dignity. Eleanor swallowed hard against the lump forming in her throat. "I would be very grateful for such an opportunity, Mr. Turner," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. A small smile touched his lips. "Good. You can start whenever you feel strong enough." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Miss Wilson? The piano, feel free to play at any time." Music shouldn't be left silent. With that, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Eleanor sat at the table, overwhelmed by the unexpected turn of events. For the first time in months, she felt something like peace. That evening, after helping Mrs. Abernathy prepare supper, Eleanor found herself alone in the main room. The ranch hands ate in their own quarters, and Henry had been called away to deal with a fence breach on the north pasture. Through the window, she could see the sun setting over the distant mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Almost without conscious thought, she drifted to the piano. Sitting on the bench, she positioned her fingers on the keys, testing them with a gentle press. The notes rang clear and true. The instrument had been kept in tune despite going unplayed. Elena began with a simple melody, one her mother had taught her when she was just a girl. The familiar notes filled the room, hesitant at first but growing more confident as muscle memory returned. She lost herself in the music, letting it wash away the pain and uncertainty of recent weeks. She didn't notice Henry's return until the final notes faded. Looking up, she found him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable in the dimming light. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, rising from the bench. "I shouldn't have, please," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Don't apologize. It's been too long since this house had music in it." Elena slowly sat back down, watching as Henry moved to light the oil lamp on the table. In the warm glow, she could see the weariness in his face, the dust from the day's work still clinging to his clothes. "Would you like me to play something else?" she offered. He nodded, settling into a chair near the fireplace. "If you wouldn't mind." Elena turned back to the keys and began a gentle nocturne, her fingers finding their way through the familiar patterns. As she played, she felt something shift in the atmosphere of the room, a softening, as though the music was reaching places long closed off. When she finished, she turned to find Henry with his eyes closed, his head resting against the back of the chair. "That was beautiful," he said quietly, opening his eyes to look at her. "Catherine used to play that piece." "Your wife had excellent taste," Elena said softly. "Mrs. Abernathy told me about her, and your son. I'm truly sorry for your loss." Henry's jaw tightened briefly. "It was a long time ago, 15 years this June." "Some wounds never fully heal," Elena offered. "They just become part of who we are." His eyes met hers, a flash of recognition in their depths. "You speak from experience." It wasn't a question, but Elena found herself wanting to answer anyway. This man had offered her safety and purpose when she had nothing. Perhaps she owed him some measure of truth in return. "My husband died last year," she began hesitantly, "thrown from a horse. We'd been married 2 years and—" She swallowed hard. "And there were no children. The doctor said there never would be. Something wrong with me." Henry's expression remained neutral, but his eyes were kind. "And your family?" Elena looked down at her hands, still resting on the piano keys. "They saw no value in a daughter who couldn't fulfill her purpose. When the drought came and money grew tight, they found someone willing to take me off their hands. A cattle baron needed a housekeeper and other services." She couldn't bring herself to look up, shame burning hot in her cheeks. To her surprise, Henry didn't respond with platitudes or awkward silence. Instead, his voice, when it came, held a controlled anger that made her look up in surprise. "Your family had no right," he said, each word precise and measured. "No right to treat you as property, to punish you for something beyond your control." The vehemence in his tone startled her. "It's not uncommon," she said quietly. "A woman's worth is measured by her ability to bear children." "By fools, perhaps," Henry replied, his expression fierce. "Children aren't everything, Miss Wilson. They're a blessing when they come, but their absence doesn't diminish a person's value." His words struck Elena with unexpected force. All her life, she'd been taught that motherhood was a woman's highest calling, her primary purpose. To hear a man, especially one who had lost his own child, speak so definitively against such beliefs was disorienting. "My wife couldn't have more children after our son," Henry continued, his voice softening. "The birth was difficult, left her damaged inside. The doctor told us trying again would kill her." A sad smile touched his lips. Catherine was worth 1,000 children to me. I never once regretted choosing her over the possibility of more sons or daughters. Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes. Your wife was fortunate to have such a husband. No, he corrected gently. I was fortunate to have her for whatever time we had. He rose from his chair. It's growing late. I should let you rest. Lena nodded, suddenly aware of how intimate their conversation had become. Good night, Mr. Turner, and thank you for everything. He paused at the door. Henry, he said, if we're to work together, you might as well use my given name. Henry, she repeated softly. Then you must call me Elena. A small smile curved his lips. Good night, Elena. After he left, Elena remained at the piano, her fingers tracing the keys without pressing them. His words echoed in her mind. Children aren't everything. Such a simple statement, yet it contradicted everything she'd been raised to believe about a woman's purpose. For the first time since the doctor had delivered his verdict on her barrenness, Elena felt something other than shame when she thought of her condition. Not acceptance. Not yet, but perhaps the first tentative step toward it. Spring gave way to early summer as Elena settled into life at the Turner Ranch. The work was demanding but satisfying, bringing order to the household accounts that had languished under Henry's haphazard care, assisting Mrs. Abernathy with the cooking and cleaning, and most rewardingly, teaching the ranch hands' children 3 afternoons a week. There were 5 of them, ranging from 6-year-old Timmy Jackson to 14-year-old Sarah Martinez, and they came eagerly for their lessons in the converted storage room that Elena had transformed into a makeshift schoolroom. For those 3 hours, the weight of her past lifted completely as she lost herself in their curiosity and enthusiasm. Henry kept a respectful distance, their interactions limited mostly to meals and occasional evenings in the main room, where Elena would sometimes play the piano while he read by the fire. Yet even in this careful dance of propriety, she found herself growing increasingly aware of him, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle patience he showed with young Timmy, who followed him like a shadow, the quiet competence with which he managed the ranch and its workers. One warm afternoon in late June, Elena sat on the porch, mending one of Henry's shirts. The ranch hands were all out checking the northern boundary after reports of cattle rustlers in the area, and Mrs. Abernathy had gone to town for supplies. The peaceful solitude was a welcome change from the usual bustle of ranch life. A cloud of dust on the horizon caught her attention. A rider was approaching at a rapid pace, too fast for casual travel. Elena set aside her mending, shading her eyes against the sun as she tried to identify the visitor. As the horse and rider drew closer, she recognized Sam Phillips, one of the younger ranch hands. His face was tight with tension, and he pulled his horse to an abrupt stop before the porch. "Miss Wilson," he called, not bothering to dismount, "is the boss here?" "No," Elena replied, standing quickly. "What's wrong, Sam?" "Rustlers hit the north herd," Sam explained, his words rushing out. "They got Carter and Diaz pinned down in the gully. Boss and the others went to help, but they're outnumbered. I need to get to town, bring the sheriff." Elena's heart raced with fear. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough." Sam's young face was grim. 5 men, maybe 6, armed and not looking to leave witnesses. Without hesitation, Elena made a decision. "Go," she urged. "I'll load the rifle and watch the ranch." Sam nodded gratefully. "Boss said to tell you to bar the doors if I saw you. Stay inside until someone comes back." He wheeled his horse around. "Sheriff should be here within 2 hours." Elena watched him gallop away, then hurried inside to Henry's study. The rifle hung above the fireplace, loaded but rarely used except for hunting. She took it down carefully. Remembering the lessons her father had grudgingly given her brother's lessons, she'd observed quietly from the corner. Time crawled by with agonizing slowness. Elena paced the main room, rifle in hand, jumping at every sound from outside. An hour passed, then another. The afternoon sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. When hoofbeats finally approached, Elena positioned herself by the window, peering cautiously through a gap in the curtains. Relief flooded her as she recognized Henry's tall figure slumped in the saddle, followed by several of the ranch hands. She rushed to the door, throwing it open as Henry dismounted stiffly. It was only as he turned toward the house that she saw the blood-stained bandana wrapped around his left arm. "You're hurt," she gasped, hurrying down the steps. Henry's face was drawn with exhaustion, but he managed a tired smile. "It's just a graze. Looks worse than it is." Elena wasn't convinced. "Come inside. Let me look at it." To her surprise, he didn't argue, following her into the house while the other men led the horses to the stable. In the kitchen, Elena gathered clean cloths, a basin of water, and the bottle of whiskey Henry kept for medicinal purposes. "Sit," she instructed, gesturing to a kitchen chair, "and take off your shirt." A hint of amusement flickered in Henry's eyes despite his obvious pain. "Rather forward of you, Miss Wilson." Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks but kept her expression stern. "Don't be difficult, Mr. Turner. I need to see the wound." With a slight wince, Henry unbuttoned his shirt and carefully peeled it away from the makeshift bandage. Elena helped him ease the fabric over the wound, trying to ignore the distracting expanse of tanned skin and muscle now exposed to her view. The bullet had indeed only grazed his upper arm, but the gash was deep enough to need attention. Elena worked methodically, cleaning away the dirt and dried blood with gentle, efficient movements. "What happened?" she asked as she worked, partly to distract him from the pain, partly to distract herself from their unprecedented proximity. "Sam probably told you the basics," Henry replied, his voice steady despite the sting of the whiskey she poured over the wound. "Rustlers trying to drive off a section of the herd. They ambushed Carter and Diaz at the North Water Hole. Are they all right?" "Diaz took a bullet in the leg, but the doc says he'll keep it. Carter's unharmed." Henry's jaw tightened. "We lost 8 head of cattle and one of the rustlers lost his life. The others escaped, but the sheriff and his deputies are tracking them." Elena carefully wrapped a clean bandage around his arm, trying not to notice the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers. "And you could have been killed, but I wasn't." His eyes caught hers, something unreadable in their blue depths. "I heard you loaded the rifle." Elena tied off the bandage and stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they had been standing. "I thought it prudent to be prepared. You know how to use it. My father taught my brothers. I watched." She began gathering the soiled cloths, needing to occupy her hands. "Not that he thought I'd ever need such knowledge. A woman's place was in the kitchen, not defending the homestead." "Your father," Henry said carefully, "seems to have had many misguided notions about a woman's place." Elena looked up, surprised by the edge in his voice. Henry had risen from the chair and was watching her intently, still bare from the waist up, the bandage stark white against his sun-darkened skin. "He was a product of his upbringing," Elena said, though the defense felt hollow even to her own ears. "As we all are." "Some of us learn to think for ourselves," Henry countered. He reached for his ruined shirt, then winced as the movement pulled at his wound. "Let me help you upstairs," Elena said, moving to his uninjured side. "You need a clean shirt and rest." She meant only to steady him, but as her hand touched his bare waist, something electric passed between them. Henry went still, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. For one dizzying moment, Elena thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stepped carefully away, restoring the proper distance between them. "Thank you for tending to me," he said, his voice rougher than before. "I can manage the stairs." Elena nodded, dropping her gaze. "Of course, I'll prepare some supper for when the men return." She busied herself at the stove, listening to his footsteps on the stairs, her heart pounding with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. The incident with the rustlers changed something between them, though neither acknowledged it directly. Henry's wound healed cleanly, leaving only a thin scar as evidence of how close he'd come to more serious injury. Life at the ranch returned to its usual rhythms, yet Elena found herself increasingly aware of Henry's presence, the sound of his footsteps, the timbre of his voice, the way his gaze often found hers across a room. July brought stifling heat, and the annual Founders' Day celebration in Pinos Altos. Elena had been at the ranch for nearly 3 months by then, long enough to have established herself as a respected member of the household. When Henry suggested they all attend the festivities, it seemed natural that Elena would accompany them. Mrs. Abernathy helped her prepare, lending her a blue calico dress that had belonged to her daughter. "It brings out your eyes," the older woman said approvingly as Elena twirled before the small mirror in her room, "and fits you better than my Sarah. She's always been plumper than you, even before her babies." Elena smoothed her hands over the fabric, surprised by her own excitement. It had been so long since she'd attended any social gathering, not since before James's death. The prospect of music, dancing, and conversation beyond the ranch's borders filled her with nervous anticipation. Henry waited for them in the yard, the buckboard cleaned and polished for the occasion. He traded his usual work clothes for a proper suit, a bit outdated in its cut, but well-maintained. His dark hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. He looked younger somehow, the habitual gravity of his expression lightened by the festive atmosphere. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Elena in her borrowed finery, a reaction that sent a surprising flutter through her stomach. "Miss Wilson," he said, offering his hand to help her into the buckboard. "You look lovely." "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy under his appreciative gaze. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Turner." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as he helped Mrs. Abernathy up beside her. High praise indeed. The drive to town was pleasant, the three of them sharing the seat of the buckboard while several of the ranch hands followed on horseback. Elena found herself enjoying the simple pleasure of the outing, the warm summer air carrying the scent of sage and pine from the surrounding hills. Pinos Altos was transformed for the celebration. Bunting in red, white, and blue draped the storefronts, and tables lined the main street laden with food for the communal feast. A platform had been erected at one end of the street for dancing, with local musicians tuning their instruments as they prepared to play. Henry secured the horses, then offered Elena his arm. "Shall we join the festivities?" With Mrs. Abernathy following at a discreet distance, they made their way through the crowded street. Elena was conscious of the curious glances directed their way. Henry Turner was evidently a figure of some note in the community, and his appearance with an unknown woman caused ripples of interest. Henry Turner. "About time you showed your face in town for something other than business." A portly man with impressive side whiskers approached, clapping Henry on the shoulder. His friendly eyes turned curious as he noted Elena. "Mayor Blackwood," Henry greeted him. "May I present Miss Elena Wilson, who has been assisting Mrs. Abernathy at the ranch these past months." "Elena, this is Mayor William Blackwood." "A pleasure, Miss Wilson," the mayor said, executing a slightly pompous bow. "Any friend of Henry's is welcome in Pinos Altos." "Thank you, Mayor," Elena replied with a polite smile. Your town has organized a lovely celebration. Indeed, indeed. And you must both participate in the dancing. It's about to begin." The mayor glanced meaningfully between them. "Henry hasn't attended a dance since, well, in quite some time." An awkward silence followed the mayor's tactless allusion to Henry's widowed state. Elena felt Henry stiffen beside her, though his expression remained politely neutral. "Perhaps later, Mayor," Henry said smoothly. "I promised Miss Wilson a tour of the town first." As they moved away, Elena could feel the weight of the mayor's speculative gaze following them. "I apologize for the mayor's presumption," Henry said quietly. "Small towns breed curiosity, and I'm afraid my solitary habits have made any change in routine a subject of interest." "There's no need to apologize," Elena assured him. "I'm grateful for the invitation to join today's celebration, regardless of any gossip it might generate." Henry's expression softened. "You've been isolated at the ranch. I thought you might enjoy the chance to socialize beyond our small circle." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Elena deeply. This man who owed her nothing consistently considered her well-being and happiness. "I do," she said simply, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Thank you." The rest of the afternoon passed in pleasant conversation and sampling of the town's culinary offerings. Elena was introduced to so many people that the names and faces began to blur together, though all were welcoming. Henry remained attentive at her side, his quiet presence a reassuring anchor amid the unfamiliar surroundings. As dusk approached, lanterns were lit around the dance platform, and the musicians struck up a lively tune. Couples began to gather, the women's colorful skirts swirling as they took their positions. "Would you care to dance?" Henry asked, surprising Elena with the invitation. From what Mrs. Abernathy had told her, Henry rarely participated in such activities. "I'd be delighted," she replied, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. He led her to the platform, his hand warm and steady at the small of her back. When he turned to face her, taking her hand in his and placing his other hand at her waist, Elena felt a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with the public setting. The music began, a waltz that swept them into its rhythm. Henry proved to be a capable dancer, guiding her smoothly through the steps. Elena, who had always enjoyed dancing but had few opportunities since her marriage, found herself relaxing into the familiar patterns. "You dance well," Henry observed, his eyes never leaving her face. "As do you," she replied. "A skill developed during your time back east." A shadow of old memories crossed his face. "Catherine insisted I learn before we were married. Said she wouldn't have a husband who couldn't escort her properly at social functions." Rather than dampening the moment, the mention of his wife felt natural, a part of the man he was. Elena found herself curious rather than uncomfortable. "She sounds like a woman who knew her own mind," she said with a smile. She was. His expression turned thoughtful. "You would have liked her, I think, and she would have approved of how you've brought music back to the house." The simple statement held such acceptance of her presence in his life, in the home he had shared with his first wife, that Elena felt a lump form in her throat. "I'm glad," she managed to say. They completed the dance in companionable silence, the music wrapping around them like a private cocoon despite the crowded platform. When the final notes faded, Elena was almost surprised to find herself still surrounded by others, so complete had been her absorption in the moment. Henry's hand lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back. "Would you like some punch?" he offered, his voice slightly rougher than usual. Elena nodded, suddenly aware of how warm she felt despite the cooling evening air. As Henry went to fetch refreshments, she made her way to the edge of the platform where Mrs. Abernathy sat with several other older women. "You two made a handsome pair out there," Mrs. Abernathy commented with a knowing smile. "First time I've seen the boss dance since I've known him." Elena felt her cheeks warm. "We're just employer and employee, Mrs. Abernathy." The older woman's expression turned serious. "For now, perhaps. But I've got eyes in my head, child. The way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching, that's not how a man looks at an employee." Before Elena could formulate a response, Henry returned with 2 cups of punch. The conversation turned to general pleasantries, but Mrs. Abernathy's words lingered in Elena's mind, adding a new dimension to her awareness of the man beside her. As the evening progressed, they danced twice more, each time with increasing comfort in each other's arms. Elena found herself laughing more freely than she had in years, caught up in the festive atmosphere and the unexpected joy of Henry's company. It was nearing midnight when they finally prepared to leave, the celebration still in full swing around them. Henry helped Elena and Mrs. Abernathy into the buckboard, his touch gentle but sure. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, all 3 of them tired but content. The night air had cooled, and Elena found herself moving closer to Henry's solid warmth as they traveled the dark road. If he noticed, he gave no sign beyond shifting slightly to accommodate her. When they reached the ranch, the house dark and welcoming against the starlit sky, Henry helped the women down from the buckboard. Mrs. Abernathy immediately headed inside, yawning behind her hand and muttering about her old bones needing rest. Elena made to follow, but Henry's hand on her arm stopped her. "Wait," he said softly. "Would you walk with me a moment?" Curious, Elena nodded. Henry offered his arm, and they strolled toward the corral where the horses moved quietly in the darkness. "I wanted to thank you," Henry said after a moment of silence. "For what?" Elena asked, genuinely puzzled. "For bringing life back to this place." His voice was low, intimate in the darkness. "When Catherine and our son died, something in me died with them. I built this ranch, made it successful, but it was just existing, not living." Elena's heart ached at the raw honesty in his words. "Henry, let me finish," he said gently. "Since you came, there's been music again. Laughter. The children you teach look forward to their lessons like Christmas morning. The men respect you for your kindness and your strength." He turned to face her, his features barely visible in the starlight. "What I'm trying to say, poorly, is that you've made a difference here. To everyone. To me." Elena stood very still, aware that something significant was happening between them, something that transcended the usual boundaries of employer and employee. "I found peace here," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "After everything, I never expected to feel safe again, to feel valued." Henry's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers warm against her skin. "You are valued, Elena, more than you know." The moment stretched between them, fragile and expectant. Then, with a gentleness that made her heart ache, Henry raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Elena," he said, releasing her hand and stepping back. "Sleep well." As Elena made her way to her room, her hand still tingling from the touch of his lips, she knew that something fundamental had shifted between them. What that would mean for her future, for their future, remained to be seen. But for the first time in a very long time, she found herself looking forward rather than back. The weeks following the Founders' Day celebration brought subtle changes to life at the Turner Ranch. Henry began inviting Elena to ride with him during his morning inspections of the property, teaching her about the operation of the ranch with a patience that suggested he valued her understanding. Their evening conversations lengthened, often continuing long after Mrs. Abernathy had retired for the night, ranging from books they had both read to deeper discussions of their pasts and beliefs. Elena found herself sharing stories of her childhood that she had never told anyone, not even her late husband, how she had secretly taught herself to read Latin from her father's old school books, how she had once rescued and raised an orphaned fox kit until it was old enough to return to the wild. In turn, Henry spoke of his dreams for the ranch, his time in the cavalry during the war, and increasingly, memories of Catherine and their brief marriage. "She would have been 38 this year," he said one evening in early August as they sat on the porch, watching a spectacular sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Sometimes I try to imagine how she would have changed, how we would have changed together." Elena, seated in the rocking chair beside him, felt no jealousy at these reminiscences. Instead, she was touched by his willingness to share this most private part of himself with her. "You think we ever truly know how life will shape us?" she asked, watching a hawk circle lazily over the distant pasture. "The girl I was at 18 never imagined the woman I would become at 25. Henry's gaze turned to her, thoughtful in the fading light. "And what kind of woman have you become, Elena Wilson?" The question was asked simply, but Elena sensed the deeper inquiry beneath it. She considered her answer carefully, rocking gently as the first stars appeared in the eastern sky. "A stronger one, I think," she finally said. "One who knows her own worth isn't tied to what others expect of her." She smiled faintly. "One who is learning to look forward instead of back." Henry nodded, a warmth in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. "I've noticed that about you, your resilience. It's remarkable." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Not remarkable," she demurred. "Just necessary. The alternative was to let them break me." "Many would have broken," Henry said quietly. "The fact that you didn't speaks volumes about your character." Elena felt suddenly self-conscious under his admiring gaze. "What about you? How has life shaped Henry Turner?" A rueful smile touched his lips, made him cautious for one thing, solitary, too concerned with building something lasting and not enough with living in the moment. His expression grew more serious. "At least, that's who I was until recently. And now—" Elena hardly dared breathe, sensing they were approaching some invisible boundary. Henry leaned forward in his chair, close enough that Elena could see the silver threads beginning to appear at his temples. "Now, I find myself thinking about possibilities I'd long since abandoned." The air between them seemed charged with unspoken words. Elena's hands stilled on the arms of her rocking chair, her eyes locked with his in the deepening twilight. Before either could speak further, the sound of approaching riders broke the moment. Henry stood, his expression shifting to alert wariness as he scanned the darkening yard. "Were you expecting visitors?" Elena asked, rising as well. "No," Henry replied, his hand moving instinctively to where his gun would normally be holstered. "Stay here." He moved to the edge of the porch as 3 riders came into view. Even in the failing light, Elena could see they were dusty from the trail, their horses showing signs of hard travel. "Turner," called the lead rider as they approached. "Got business with you." Henry's posture remained tense. "State your business from there, stranger." The rider pulled his horse to a stop a respectful distance from the house. "Name's Wilson, James Wilson. Looking for my sister-in-law, Elena. Heard she might be here." Elena felt the blood drain from her face at the familiar name. James Wilson, her late husband's younger brother. A man she had met only twice, at her wedding and at James's funeral. "Elena." Henry half turned toward her, his expression questioning. She stepped forward, moving to stand beside Henry at the porch rail. "James," she acknowledged, fighting to keep her voice steady. "This is unexpected." The young man, for he was only about 23, Elena recalled, removed his hat, revealing a shock of wheat blonde hair that resembled his dead brother's. Been looking for you for months, he said. Your pa finally admitted what they did. His voice hardened. Wasn't right what they tried to do to you. Elena gripped the porch rail for support. Why are you here, James? To make things right if I can. He glanced at the men flanking him. This is Sheriff Dawson from Cedar Creek and his deputy. We've been tracking the men who your pa sold you to. Henry's hand came to rest at the small of Elena's back, a steadying presence. Perhaps you should continue this conversation inside, out of the night air, he suggested, his tone neutral but his eyes watchful. Elena nodded, grateful for his calm intervention. Yes, please come in. You must be tired from your journey. As the men dismounted and secured their horses, Henry leaned close to Elena. Are you all right? He murmured, concern evident in his voice. I don't know, she admitted honestly. I never expected to see anyone from my old life again. I'll be right beside you, he promised, his hand warm against her back. Whatever you need. The simple assurance gave Elena the strength to face the unexpected visitors. As they moved inside, Henry discreetly dispatched one of the ranch hands to wake Mrs. Abernathy to prepare coffee and food for their guests. In the lamplight of the main room, Elena could see James more clearly. He had matured since she'd last seen him, his boyish features hardening into those of a man. There was a seriousness to him that hadn't been there at her wedding, a gravity that reminded her painfully of his brother. You're looking well, Elena, James said awkwardly after introductions had been made and everyone was seated. Better than when I saw you last. It's been over a year, Elena replied. Much has happened. Sheriff Dawson, a grizzled man with shrewd eyes, leaned forward. Mrs. Porter Wilson, Elena corrected quietly. I've resumed my maiden name. The sheriff nodded in acknowledgement. Miss Wilson, then. Your brother-in-law came to me with a disturbing story about your family attempting to sell you to Marcus Holloway. Is that accurate? Elena's hands twisted in her lap. Yes. After my husband died and it became clear I couldn't bear children, my family saw me as a burden. When Holloway offered to take me off their hands in exchange for canceling some of their debt, she swallowed hard. I fled before the arrangement could be completed. Holloway isn't just a cattle baron, the sheriff explained, his expression grim. He's been trafficking women for years, sending them to houses of ill repute across the territory. We've been building a case against him, but witnesses tend to disappear. Horror washed over Elena as she realized how much worse her fate might have been. I had no idea, she whispered. I just knew I couldn't bear to be treated as property. Henry's jaw tightened, though his voice remained level when he spoke. How does this concern Elena now? She's safe here, established a new life. James Wilson shifted uncomfortably. Holloway's been looking for her. Considers her his property since he paid for her, when I found out what Pa had done. His young face hardened with determination. I knew I had to make it right. Found the sheriff, told him everything I knew about Holloway's operation. Which was considerable, the sheriff added. Young Wilson here has helped us track down 3 of Holloway's associates. But Holloway himself remains elusive, and we have reason to believe he hasn't given up on finding you, Miss Wilson. Elena felt a chill run through her despite the warm evening. What exactly are you suggesting, Sheriff? We need your testimony to strengthen our case against Holloway, the lawman said bluntly. And in the meantime, you may be in danger here. Holloway has men all through this territory. It's only a matter of time before someone recognizes you and reports back to him. No. Henry's refusal was immediate and firm. Elena has already suffered enough because of this man. I won't have her used as bait. With all due respect, Mr. Turner, the sheriff replied, this isn't your decision to make. It's mine, Elena said quietly, drawing all eyes to her. And I need time to consider what you're asking. James leaned forward earnestly. Elena, I know we were never close, but James would want me to protect you. He loved you so much. His voice broke slightly on the words. Let me do this for both of you. The mention of her late husband stirred complicated emotions in Elena's heart. She had loved James Porter in her way, though their marriage had been more one of convenience than passion. His death had grieved her, but it had also freed her from the increasing pressure to produce the heir he desperately wanted. We'll stay in Pino's Altos tonight, the sheriff said, recognizing her need for time. Think on it, Miss Wilson. We'll return tomorrow for your answer. After the men departed for town, escorted by one of the ranch hands, Elena remained seated in the main room, her mind whirling with the implications of their visit. Henry dismissed Mrs. Abernathy for the night, then returned to sit beside Elena on the settee. You don't have to do this, he said softly. Whatever you decide, I'll support you, but don't feel obligated to put yourself at risk. Elena looked up at him, touched by his concern. If what the sheriff says is true, I'm already at risk. And how many other women might suffer if Holloway isn't stopped? That's not your burden to bear, Henry insisted. Isn't it? Elena stood, moving to the window to gaze out at the starlit yard. All my life I've let others determine my path. My father, my husband, even my family when they tried to sell me. She turned back to face Henry. This is my chance to make a choice that matters, to help others even at cost to myself. Henry rose and crossed to her, his expression troubled. I admire your courage, Elena, I always have. But the thought of you in danger. The naked concern in his voice made her heart constrict. Elena reached up, touching his cheek gently. I'm not without protection, am I? I have you. Henry captured her hand, pressing it more firmly against his face before turning to place a kiss in her palm. The intimate gesture sent a shiver through Elena. Yes, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You have me, for whatever that's worth. It's worth everything, she whispered. Their eyes held for a long, charged moment. Then, with aching slowness, Henry bent his head and brushed his lips against hers, a question, not a demand. Elena answered by rising on her tiptoes, her hand sliding to the nape of his neck as she returned the kiss with a gentle fervor that surprised them both. Henry's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, becoming something hungry and urgent. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing raggedly. Henry rested his forehead against hers, his hand still warm at her waist. I've wanted to do that for weeks, he admitted, his voice husky. Elena smiled, her heart lighter despite the danger looming on the horizon. Why did you wait so long? A rueful chuckle escaped him. Fear, mostly, that you wouldn't welcome my attention, that it was too soon after your husband. That the difference in our circumstances made it inappropriate. And now, she asked softly, now I know that life is too precious and too uncertain to waste time on fear. His expression grew serious. Whatever happens tomorrow, Elena, know that you've awakened something in me I thought was gone forever. Elena reached up to trace the line of his jaw, marveling at the turn her life had taken. And you've shown me what it means to be truly valued for who I am, not what I can or cannot give. They stood together in the quiet house, the future uncertain but no longer facing it alone. Morning brought clear skies and difficult decisions. Elena rose early, her mind made up after a night of reflection. When Henry found her in the kitchen helping Mrs. Abernathy prepare breakfast, one look at her resolute expression told him she had reached a conclusion. You're going to help them, he said simply, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Abernathy. Elena nodded. I have to, not just for myself, but for all the women Holloway has victimized. Henry's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Then we'll need a plan. I won't have you walking into danger without protection. The "we" warmed Elena more than she could express. Whatever was growing between them, Henry clearly saw their futures as intertwined. James Wilson and the sheriff arrived mid-morning along with the taciturn deputy. Elena met them on the porch, composed and determined. "I'll testify," she told the sheriff without preamble, "but I have conditions." Sheriff Dawson raised an eyebrow but nodded for her to continue. "I won't leave the ranch until it's time for the trial," Elena stated firmly. "If Holloway is looking for me, I'm safer here than anywhere." "Agreed," the sheriff said. "What else?" "When the time comes, Henry comes with me." She glanced at the rancher standing supportively at her shoulder. "I trust him with my life." James frowned slightly at this evidence of Elena's attachment to the rancher, but the sheriff merely nodded again. "Reasonable enough. Anything else?" Elena took a deep breath. "Yes. I want your word that once this is over, no one will ever try to force me to return to my family. I've made a new life here and I intend to keep it." James stepped forward at this. "Elena, that's not no one wants to force you to do anything. I came to help you, not drag you back." "Nevertheless," Elena insisted, "I want the sheriff's assurance." "You have it," Dawson said. "You're a grown woman, Miss Wilson. No one can compel you to live where you don't choose to." With the terms agreed upon, the sheriff outlined his plan. He would spread word through certain channels that Elena had been spotted in Santa Fe, hoping to draw Holloway out. Meanwhile, he would continue gathering evidence and witnesses for the trial, which he expected would occur within a month. "Keep your eyes open," he warned as they prepared to leave. "Holloway has friends everywhere. Trust no strangers." After the visitors departed, Henry insisted on increasing security around the ranch. 2 men would patrol the boundaries at all times, and no one would ride out alone. The ranch hands, loyal to Henry and protective of Elena, readily agreed to the new precautions. Life settled into a new routine, one shadowed by the constant awareness of potential danger. Yet despite this, or perhaps because of it, Elena and Henry grew closer. Their stolen moments together became precious islands of normalcy amid the tension. One evening, as they sat on the porch after supper, Henry took Elena's hand in his expression uncharacteristically hesitant. "There's something I need to ask you," he began, "and I know the timing isn't ideal with everything that's happening, but—" Elena's heart quickened at his serious tone. "What is it? When this is over, when Holloway is behind bars and you're truly safe?" He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "Would you consider staying here, not as my employee but as my wife?" Though she had begun to hope for such an outcome, the actual proposal still took Elena's breath away. "Henry, are you certain? You know I can't give you children." His expression softened as he brought her hand to his lips. "I told you once before, Elena, children aren't everything. You are everything: your strength, your kindness, your music, your laughter." He smiled gently. "Besides, there are plenty of children in this world who need homes. If we decide we want a family, there are other ways to build one." Tears pricked at Elena's eyes, not of sorrow but of overwhelming joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I would be honored to be your wife." Henry's smile was radiant as he pulled her into his arms, sealing their promise with a kiss that spoke of hope and possibility, and a future neither had dared imagine for themselves. They agreed to keep their engagement private until after the trial, not wanting to provide Holloway with any additional incentive to target the ranch. Only Mrs. Abernathy was informed, and the older woman's tearful blessing touched them both deeply. "About time," she said, wiping her eyes with her apron. "Been watching you 2 dance around each other for months." 2 weeks passed in relative peace, the ranch's increased vigilance seemingly effective in deterring any unwelcome visitors. Elena continued her teaching and household duties, finding comfort in the routine even as she prepared mentally for the ordeal ahead. The attack, when it came, was not the frontal assault they had feared but a more insidious threat. It began with smoke, detected by one of the hands during the pre-dawn patrol. A fire had been set in the dry brush at the eastern edge of the property, strategically placed to draw attention and manpower away from the main house. Henry organized a response team immediately, sending most of the available men to contain the blaze before it could spread to the grazing lands. Elena watched from the porch as they rode out, Henry giving her final instructions before he joined them. "Bar the doors behind me," he told her, checking his pistol one last time. "Mrs. Abernathy knows where the shotgun is kept. Don't open for anyone you don't recognize." Elena nodded, fighting down her fear. "Be careful." He kissed her quickly, then mounted his horse and led the men toward the growing column of smoke visible against the lightening sky. Elena did as instructed, securing the house, and then helping Mrs. Abernathy prepare coffee and food for the men when they returned. They worked in tense silence, ears straining for any unusual sounds. The knock, when it came, was so normal-sounding that Elena nearly opened the door without thinking. A man's voice called from the porch, "Hello, anyone home? My wagon broke down on the road. Need some help." Elena exchanged a glance with Mrs. Abernathy, who shook her head slightly. Moving quietly to the window, Elena peered through a gap in the curtains. A well-dressed man stood on the porch, his appearance respectable enough clean-shaven, wearing a good suit despite the early hour. Behind him, she could see a wagon on the road, one wheel visibly damaged. Still, something felt wrong. Henry had warned her to expect trouble, and the coincidence of a stranger appearing just when most of the ranch hands were occupied with the fire seemed too convenient. "I'm sorry, sir," Elena called through the door, "but the men are all out fighting a fire. There's no one here who can help you at the moment." A pause, then. "Perhaps you could at least offer some water. It's a hot morning and I've been walking for an hour." Mrs. Abernathy had retrieved the shotgun and now stood grimly at Elena's side. "Don't like this," the older woman muttered. "Too polite by half." Elena silently agreed. "There's a well by the stable," she called. "Help yourself and the men should be back soon." Another pause, longer this time. Then the voice, noticeably cooler. "Why don't you come out here and talk properly, Miss Wilson? Or should I say, Mrs. Porter?" Ice flooded Elena's veins. Only someone from her past would know her married name. "Who are you?" she demanded, though she feared she already knew the answer. A chuckle, devoid of humor. "Marcus Holloway, at your service, the man who paid good money for you." His tone hardened. "The man you cheated." Mrs. Abernathy's knuckles whitened around the shotgun. "The back door," she whispered urgently. "Go now, child, I'll hold him here." Elena shook her head fiercely. "I won't leave you. Don't be foolish," the older woman hissed. "He wants you, not me. Go to the stable, get a horse. Ride for the fire, find Henry." On the porch, Holloway was losing patience. "Come out now, and I promise no one will get hurt." "Stay in there, and I'll burn this place to the ground with you in it." Elena made a swift decision. "Keep him talking," she whispered to Mrs. Abernathy. "I'll circle around to the stable, but I'm not leaving. I'll try to get behind him." Before the housekeeper could protest, Elena slipped toward the back of the house, moving as quietly as possible. She exited through the kitchen door, grateful that it opened noiselessly on well-oiled hinges. The morning sun had risen fully now, casting long shadows across the yard. Elena used these for cover, making her way toward the stable in a wide arc that kept her out of sight from the front porch. As she approached the stable, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. 2 horses were tied up behind Holloway's broken wagon, saddled and ready for a quick escape. And worse, A second man was emerging from the stable, a rifle in his hands. Elena froze, pressing herself against the side of the chicken coop. The second man was scanning the yard, clearly looking for something or someone. Had Holloway anticipated her escape attempt from the house, she could hear Mrs. Abernathy's voice, still engaging Holloway in conversation, buying precious time. The second man began moving toward the house, his back to Elena. Making a split-second decision, Elena picked up a fallen branch from near her feet. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out from her hiding place and brought the branch down hard on the back of the man's head. He crumpled instantly, the rifle clattering to the ground. Elena stood frozen for a moment, hardly believing what she had done. Then instinct took over. She grabbed the rifle, checked that it was loaded as her father had taught her brothers to do, and moved swiftly toward the front of the house. Holloway was still on the porch, his attention focused on the front door where Mrs. Abernathy continued to stall him. Elena approached from the side, the rifle steady in her hands. "Step away from the door," she called, her voice remarkably calm despite her racing heart. Holloway whirled, his hand moving toward his waistcoat where a pistol was undoubtedly concealed. Elena raised the rifle to her shoulder, aiming squarely at his chest. "I wouldn't," she warned. "I grew up watching my brothers shoot. I know which end of this rifle does the damage." Holloway's face, handsome in a cold, calculating way, registered surprise, then anger. "You've got spirit, I'll grant you that. The customers would have paid extra for that." The casual cruelty of his words made Elena's stomach turn, but she kept the rifle steady. "Back away from the house, now. Or what, you'll shoot me." Holloway's smile was mocking. "I don't think you have it in you. Try me," Elena replied evenly. "After what you intended for me, for other women like me, I'd be doing the world a favor." Something in her tone must have convinced him she was serious. Holloway took a step back, his smile fading. "This isn't over, Elena. You belong to me. I paid for you fair and square." "I belong to no one but myself," Elena said, a lifetime of suppressed anger lending steel to her voice. "And soon you'll be facing a judge who will ensure you never harm another woman again." Holloway's expression darkened. "We'll see about that." His hand moved in a blur, drawing his concealed pistol with practiced speed. Before Elena could react, a deafening boom filled the air. Holloway staggered, a look of shock on his face as a red stain blossomed on his shoulder. Elena glanced toward the source of the shot. Mrs. Abernathy stood in the doorway, the shotgun still smoking in her hands. "Been wanting to do that for 5 minutes," the housekeeper said grimly. "Man talks too much." Holloway had fallen to his knees, his pistol dropped from suddenly nerveless fingers. Elena kept her rifle trained on him, unwilling to trust that he was truly incapacitated. "Tie him up," she instructed Mrs. Abernathy. "Use the clothesline. There's another one by the stable, unconscious." The older woman nodded, disappearing briefly into the house to retrieve the rope. As she moved to secure Holloway, the sound of approaching horses reached them. Elena tensed, then relaxed as she recognized Henry's distinctive whistle. Henry and the ranch hands burst into the yard moments later, weapons drawn, having seen the stranger's horses from a distance. The sight that greeted them, Elena with a rifle, Mrs. Abernathy tying up a bleeding Holloway, and a second man still unconscious by the stable, brought them to an abrupt halt. "Elena." Henry's voice was a mixture of confusion and admiration. "We had visitors," she said simply, finally lowering the rifle as the immediate danger passed. "Mr. Holloway decided to collect what he believes belongs to him." Henry's expression darkened as he dismounted and strode to her side. "Are you hurt?" "No, thanks to Mrs. Abernathy's excellent aim." The housekeeper snorted as she finished binding Holloway's wrists. Man was going to shoot her. What was I supposed to do? Let him. Henry sent two of the hands to secure the second man, then turned his attention to Holloway. The cattle baron glared up at him, his shoulder still bleeding despite Mrs. Abernathy's makeshift bandage. You're interfering with a legitimate business transaction, Turner, Holloway spat. The woman was sold to me legal and proper. Henry's face remained impassive, but his eyes burned with controlled fury. Human beings aren't property, Holloway. Not women, not children, not anyone. He nodded to one of the ranch hands. Ride for the sheriff. Tell him we have a present for him. As the man galloped off, Henry finally turned back to Elena, his expression softening. You're sure you're not hurt? I'm fine, she assured him, though now that the danger had passed, she found herself trembling slightly. Just ready for this to be over. Henry wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her against his side. It will be soon. Holloway won't hurt anyone else after today. Sheriff Dawson arrived by mid-afternoon, accompanied by James Wilson and two deputies. His face registered satisfaction as he surveyed the captured men. Been chasing this snake for years, he commented, nodding toward Holloway, who had been moved to the barn under guard. Never thought he'd be brought down by the very women he tried to victimize. Elena, recovered from her ordeal and sitting with Henry on the porch, smiled wryly. Neither did he, I imagine. James approached awkwardly, his young face serious. Elena, I'm glad you're safe. He glanced at Henry, noting their proximity on the bench. Looks like you found a good place here. I have, Elena agreed simply. The young man nodded, seeming to accept what he saw between them. James would have wanted you to be happy, he said quietly. That's all he ever wanted for you. Elena felt a pang of old grief, tempered now by the joy she had found. Thank you, James. That means a great deal. As the sheriff prepared to depart with his prisoners, he turned to Elena one last time. Trial's set for 3 weeks from now in Santa Fe. We'll need you there to testify. I'll be there, Elena promised. This ends now. The following weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Elena gave her deposition to a court representative who traveled to the ranch, detailing her family's arrangement with Holloway and what she had learned about his operation. Henry remained supportively by her side throughout, his quiet strength a constant reassurance. The journey to Santa Fe for the trial was tense but uneventful. Henry insisted on accompanying Elena, leaving the ranch in the capable hands of his foreman. They stayed in a respectable hotel, separate rooms with Mrs. Abernathy as chaperone to preserve propriety, though their engagement was now openly acknowledged. The trial itself lasted 4 days. Elena testified clearly and calmly, her quiet dignity impressing the jury and spectators alike. Other witnesses came forward as well, women who had escaped Holloway's clutches, associates who turned evidence in exchange for leniency, even Elena's brother-in-law who testified about the transaction between her father and Holloway. On the final day, as the jury deliberated, Henry found Elena standing by the window of the courthouse anteroom, gazing out at the bustling streets of Santa Fe. Whatever happens, he said, coming to stand beside her, you've shown incredible courage. I'm proud of you. Elena turned to him, a small smile lifting the corners of her mouth. It feels strange, speaking openly of things my family considered shameful, my barrenness being sold like property, but there's a freedom in it too. The shame was never yours to bear, Henry said firmly. It belonged to those who failed to see your true worth. Before Elena could respond, the bailiff appeared at the door. The jury's back, he announced. They returned to the crowded courtroom, Henry's hand warm and supportive at the small of Elena's back. The verdict, when it came, was swift and unequivocal. Guilty on all counts. Holloway was sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison, effectively ending his operation and securing justice for his many victims. As they left the courthouse, Elena felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't just Holloway's conviction, though that brought its own satisfaction. It was the knowledge that she had faced her past, stood her ground, and emerged stronger for it. "It's really over," she murmured as they descended the courthouse steps into the bright autumn sunshine. Henry squeezed her hand gently. "Not over," he corrected. "Just beginning." James Wilson approached as they reached the street, his expression both pleased and melancholy. "I'm heading back east tomorrow," he told Elena. "Thought I should say goodbye." "Thank you for everything you did," Elena said sincerely. "I know it couldn't have been easy going against your own family." James shook his head. "Family doesn't sell family what they did. It wasn't right." He glanced at Henry. "You'll take care of her," Henry nodded solemnly. "With my life." "Good." James hesitated, then pulled a small package from his pocket. "This was James's, found it among his things. Thought you might want it." Elena unwrapped the package to reveal a small silver pocket watch. "His grandfather's watch," she said softly, memories flooding back. "He treasured this. He'd want you to have it," James insisted. "Something to remember him by." Elena clutched the watch, touched by the gesture. "I'll cherish it." With one last nod to them both, James turned and walked away, a solitary figure against the bustling backdrop of Santa Fe. "Are you all right?" Henry asked gently as they watched him go. Elena considered the question seriously. "Yes," she finally said. "I think I am, ready to go home." Home. The word held new meaning now. Not the family farm where she'd grown up, nor the small house she'd shared briefly with James Porter. Home was the Turner Ranch, with its wide open spaces and the family she was building there. They were married 2 weeks after returning from Santa Fe. A simple ceremony in the Pinos Altos church with Mrs. Abernathy and the ranch hands as witnesses. Elena wore a new dress of pale blue silk, ordered specially from Santa Fe, and carried wildflowers gathered from the meadow near the ranch. As they exchanged vows, Elena felt a sense of rightness, of coming full circle. The journey that had begun in desperation, fleeing her family's betrayal, had led her to this moment, joining her life with a man who valued her for exactly who she was. The celebration afterward was joyous, the entire town turning out to wish them well. Mayor Blackwood made a florid speech, the ranch hands organized an impromptu dance, and Mrs. Abernathy cried unabashedly throughout. It was late evening when they finally returned to the ranch, their ranch now, truly shared. As Henry carried Elena across the threshold in keeping with tradition, they both laughed at the formality of it. This had been her home in all the ways that mattered for months already. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of what was now their bedroom, Elena traced the lines of Henry's face with gentle fingers. "Happy?" he asked, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Beyond words," she replied honestly. "I never thought I could feel this way again, safe, valued, loved for who I am rather than what I can provide." Henry pulled her closer, his arms strong around her. "You are everything I never dared hope for after Catherine died, a second chance I didn't think I deserved." "We both got second chances," Elena murmured, resting her head on his chest. "Perhaps that's what makes this so precious." As winter settled over the ranch, bringing quiet days and long, peaceful evenings by the fire, Elena and Henry fell into the comfortable rhythms of married life. There were adjustments, of course, habits to accommodate, preferences to learn, the occasional disagreement to navigate, but underlying it all was a deep respect and growing love that made even the challenges worthwhile. Elena continued teaching the ranch hands children, now in a proper schoolroom that Henry had built onto the main house. Her students grew in number as word spread of her skill and patience, with several families from outlying homesteads sending their children to the Turner Ranch for education they couldn't receive elsewhere. Henry watched her work with pride, marveling at the natural way she connected with the children, firm but kind, demanding their best while making learning an adventure rather than a chore. "You're remarkable with them," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch after the last student had departed. "They adore you." Elena smiled, pleased by his praise. "They're eager to learn. That makes teaching a joy rather than work." Henry was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Have you ever considered that perhaps your purpose wasn't to bear children, but to nurture them in other ways? To teach, to guide, to shape young minds?" The question caught Elena by surprise. She had never thought of her work with the children as fulfilling the maternal instinct that her barrenness had seemingly denied her. I haven't looked at it that way," she admitted. "But perhaps you're right. There are many ways to mother, aren't there?" Henry nodded, taking her hand in his. "You've touched more young lives through your teaching than many women do through bearing children alone." He smiled softly. "Though if you ever want children of our own to raise, there are always those who need homes." Elena squeezed his hand, heart full at his understanding. "Perhaps someday. For now, I'm content with what we have." Spring brought new beginnings to the Turner Ranch. The cattle flourished, several of the mares foaled healthy colts, and the garden Elena had planted behind the house burst into vibrant life. It also brought an unexpected letter, delivered by a travel-worn courier who had detoured specifically to the ranch. Elena recognized her mother's handwriting immediately, though she hadn't received any communication from her family since her flight nearly a year before. She sat alone in the garden to read it, uncertain whether she wanted Henry to witness whatever her mother might have to say. The letter was brief, the handwriting shaky in places as though written by someone unwell or deeply emotional. "My dearest Elena," it began. "News of the Holloway trial reached us, along with word of your marriage. Your father refuses to speak of it, his pride still too wounded by the public revelation of his actions. But I cannot remain silent any longer. What we did to you was unforgivable. I allowed your father's judgment to override my duty as your mother, and for that I will carry shame to my grave. I do not ask for forgiveness I do not deserve, only that you know that not a day passes that I don't regret my weakness. James Wilson wrote to tell us you are happy, respected, and loved by your new husband. This brings me more joy than I can express, though I claim no right to such feelings. If you ever wish to contact me, I would welcome it, but I understand if that door is forever closed. With love and deepest remorse, your mother." Elena sat motionless after reading the letter, tears rolling unchecked down her cheeks. The anger she had carried toward her family, particularly her mother who had stood by and allowed her to be sold, had been a hard, cold weight in her chest for so long. Now, faced with this admission of wrongdoing, she felt that weight beginning to crack. "Elena." Henry's voice came gently from behind her. "Are you all right? The courier said it was from your family." She turned, not bothering to hide her tears. "From my mother, she regrets what happened." Henry sat beside her on the garden bench, not touching her but present, supportive. "And how do you feel about that?" "I don't know," Elena admitted, looking down at the letter in her hands. "Part of me wants to crumple this up and forget they exist. Another part remembers the mother who taught me piano, who read to me at night, who loved me before I became a disappointment." "What do you want to do?" Henry asked simply. Elena considered for a long moment. "I'm not ready to forgive, not completely, but perhaps I could write back. Let her know I received her letter, that I'm well, that's all for now." Henry nodded, understanding without judgment. Whatever you decide, I'm here. That evening, Elena composed a brief reply to her mother. She shared nothing personal beyond confirmation of her happiness in her marriage and her work teaching the local children. It was a small olive branch, neither fully embracing reconciliation nor completely closing the door on it. As spring turned to summer, Elena found herself busier than ever. In addition to her teaching duties, she had taken on coordinating the medical care for the ranch and surrounding homesteads after the town's doctor relocated to Santa Fe. Though not trained as a nurse, her education and natural aptitude for healing made her the nearest thing to medical help for miles around. It was in this capacity that she first met the Crawfords, a young couple attempting to establish a homestead 10 miles from the Turner Ranch. Sarah Crawford, heavily pregnant with their first child, had developed complications that her husband didn't understand and couldn't manage. Elena rode out with Henry as soon as the desperate man arrived at their door, bringing her small collection of medical supplies and books. They found Sarah in active labor, frightened and exhausted after nearly 2 days of ineffective contractions. "The baby's not positioned properly," Elena explained to Henry and Robert Crawford after examining the young woman. "It needs to be turned, or neither mother nor child will survive." Robert paled visibly. "Can you do that? Turn the baby?" Elena hesitated. "I've read about the procedure and I assisted once when our neighbor's daughter gave birth, but—" She took a deep breath. "I'm not a doctor, but the nearest real doctor is in Santa Fe, too far to reach in time." "Please," Sarah begged from the bed, her face contorted with pain. "Try, save my baby." Looking into the young woman's frightened eyes, Elena saw herself the desperation to bring forth life, the fear of failure. With a silent prayer, she nodded. "Henry, I'll need hot water, clean cloths, and the strongest whiskey Mr. Crawford has. Mr. Crawford, you should wait outside." The next hours were the most harrowing of Elena's life. Guided by memory, instinct, and the descriptions in her medical text, she worked to reposition the infant in Sarah's womb. Henry remained at her side throughout, steady and supportive, following her instructions without question. Just as dawn broke over the eastern horizon, the triumphant cry of a newborn filled the tiny homestead cabin. Elena, exhausted but elated, wrapped the squalling infant, a healthy boy, in a clean cloth and placed him in his mother's trembling arms. "He's perfect," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face as she counted tiny fingers and toes. "You saved us both." Elena smiled wearily. "You did the hard work, I just helped a little." After ensuring mother and baby were stable and showing Robert how to care for them both, Elena and Henry began the ride home. They traveled in companionable silence for a while, both processing the intense experience they had shared. "You were amazing," Henry said finally, his voice filled with admiration. "How you knew what to do, kept calm through all of it." Elena shook her head modestly. "I was terrified the entire time. One wrong move and I could have lost them both." "But you didn't," Henry pointed out. "You saved 2 lives today." As they crested a hill, the ranch came into view in the distance, bathed in the golden light of early morning. Elena reined in her horse for a moment, overwhelmed by a sudden wave of emotion. "What is it?" Henry asked, concern evident in his voice as he stopped beside her. "I just realized something," Elena said softly. "All my life, I was taught that a woman's worth lay in her ability to bear children. When I discovered I couldn't, I believed myself worthless." Her gaze swept over the ranch, their home, and beyond to the scattered homesteads where her students lived, where she had tended minor illnesses and injuries, where today she had helped bring new life into the world. "But look at what I've done, what I continue to do," she continued, her voice strengthening. I teach children who might otherwise go uneducated. I tend to the sick when no doctor is available. Today, I help deliver a child that might not have survived otherwise. Henry reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. You create life in ways that go beyond the physical, he said, understanding immediately. You nurture minds, heal bodies, build community. Elena squeezed his hand, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over her. Children aren't everything, she echoed his words from months ago. They're a blessing when they come, but their absence doesn't diminish a person's value. No, Henry agreed, his eyes warm with love. It never did. As they rode the final distance to their home, Elena felt a circle close the journey from shame to acceptance, from rejection to belonging, complete at last. She had been sold because she couldn't bear children, cast aside as damaged and worthless. But here, with this man who saw her true worth, she had found a purpose and love greater than she had ever imagined possible. The future stretched before them, rich with possibility. There might be children to adopt, more students to teach, lives to touch in countless meaningful ways. Whatever came, Elena knew one thing with absolute certainty: she was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, with the man she was meant to love. And that was everything.